It's helpful to understand that cognitive strategy. It is helpful to think about the Chinese way of knowledge, the Chinese wisdom, and not that I feel an expert in it in any way, but I have been extremely interested in interpreting and reading, particularly interpretation of the I Ching, and the mode by which divination by Chinese culture for millennia, actually, or maybe not for millennia, because the whole, for millennia, but in a very formal fashion only for the last millennia. But still, that's a long, long time for a culture to practice a mode of thinking that actually requires an entirely different strategy from the one that we have been taught in our classical education system, in our relationship to the written word. Absolutely. If we were to understand, or if we were to really graduate from, and like consciously do so, from a linear thinking to a hypertextual one, where we would include environmental factors and context, very, very much deeper context than we normally do, into our processing information, we would then learn from the Chinese how to do it, juxtaposing things, and then bringing together whatever, in a very hypertextual fashion, whatever comes together to give a shape and a meaning to that particular form. Thus trusting something that we linear people don't trust. Trusting in the symbolic value of the configuration of the present. A trust which could be a complete foolery, because you could be saying, well, all right, I'm only trusting what I'm producing. Fine, but I mean, most people do that anyway, and then they have consensus around it. But the linear people do not trust that the configuration of the present actually contains a message that they could interpret, whereas the Chinese do. The future of positioning yourself in space and time and relating to people and relating to decision and so on may very much look more like what the Chinese, maybe much more intuitive in some way, what the Chinese are doing. I find that's maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, because I think it's a better method, but I also feel that it connects very well with the present state of the fragile equilibrium that we are experiencing right now in society and psychology. But
so you think that we will have something like short sentence structures of thinking in our linear culture? What do you mean when you say the Chinese have this kind of thinking? They think
actually, I'm glad you brought this up. Short sentence would very much be part of that cultural change. Absolutely, since we have Twitter right now, which is nothing but a short sentence. Yes. And we're practicing it like with the same glee as we practiced the telegraph when it had to, or the SMS when, every time we shortened the sentence, so to speak. Yes. Maybe the idea of a short sentence, which is like a quick little stimuli, is exactly the result of this hypertextualization. Chinese poetry, and Japanese poetry for that matter, are made of short sentences. Wisdom is made of short sentences. All these things. The linear thinker, like myself, has long ones, but it's also a very good observation that.
Yes, I'm asking you that because you told yesterday about the homeopathic way of releasing thinkings now.
Yes,
not anymore that great and effective block, of information, but these little sentences that keep showing constantly things,
That's
keep
right.
you in contact constantly with this small.
Well, our homeopathy right now is guided a little bit by the succession of sites like Dig and others, where a YouTube or a interesting statement or something is actually traveling faster and it's being accelerated. But I still consider that an homeopathic relationship, because it is only a very small dose of something somewhere in this big sort of soup of information that hits the current that it needs in order to get whatever effect, and then he can heal the body. I mean, I kind of trust homeopathy. Not that I practice anything. I'm usually, touch wood, not really in need of it, but I kind of trust it, and I think it is exactly the image that corresponds to how circulation of information happens on the internet. Another version of the message in the bottle, if you want, but this ubiquitous presence of every bit of information we might need, and this power of distributing it to everybody who needs it.
Yes, and it's a kind of way of thinking and deciding people develop, because they start to have this contact, superficial contact, and then they choose something to get a little bit deeper. And then they have a lot of superficial contacts, this homeopathic contact, and they choose a little bit more. And when they have to make a decision different from that environment where they're now standing, they can go back and to the other information that they had. They have many options and
many. Will that overall make us better, wiser, and more successful? I don't know. I do feel quite positive about it at large, but of course we have to take account of the vagaries of human nature, so-called human nature. Anyway, that's an old word now. But we really do need to have currents of sensibility that go beyond cultural differences, that go beyond traditional boundaries. There's a lot, and I'm sort of balbucating this, but there's a lot of value shift, I think, that are going to be occurring over the next decade. It appears as if more and more people will. We were talking about the reverence and the lack of reverence for every state or enterprise or media. There will be a point, I think, at which the reinvention of how social organization sets itself up. And I call it the emergent, self-organizing bias of humanity, I think, and hope. In very large spectrum of time, long periods, whether it's the Chinese we talk about, or whether it's our own experience, westernized experience, we go through trauma and crisis, very deep trauma and crisis, knee-jerk reaction from the past trying to block the future, wars and torture. Spanish Inquisition is an example of a cultural, social, psychological base that cannot accept the privacy and the autonomy and the liberty of thought of the new individualized, personalized person. This is a classic example of how much we suffer. A whiplash of the whole culture of a very producing, very hardworking group of people suddenly run by a complete madman in Germany, and then setting the world on fire, literally, and that's an electrical wire. That's suddenly a world war is a war that's actually aided by the communication media that bring the country together or against each other. That whole thing is a very painful, horrid reaction of a culture that has to adapt, learn how to integrate the new rhythms, how they are being transformed, right? So the present condition is terrorism. Terrorism is beyond. It's the form of war that a society based on information takes.